Steve Scott is known as one of Canada's most distinguished geoscientists, recognized worldwide for his contribution to academia and the mining industry. He's been called one of Canada's most prolific and influential geoscience researchers in the past 50 years.
I don't believe there's been a Canadian or international scientist who's had a bigger impact on the education and research of marine geology. His work, both as a primary researcher and leader in advancing the entire community, has shaped current thinking on how hydrothermal systems and volcanogenic massive sulfide deposits develop.
Steve Scott was born in Fort Frances, Ontario in 1941, the first child born at the then new Fort Frances Hospital.
The day he was born was the day that they opened the Fort Frances Hospital. They were cutting the ribbons at the front door, and his mom was going in the back door to have a baby.
Steve started studying chemistry, but after a summer job in geology, realized he could combine the two. His career as a geochemist started with a bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Western Ontario. In 1968, Steve went on to obtain his PhD in geochemistry and mineralogy at Pennsylvania State University. That led to a long and illustrious career as a researcher, teacher, lecturer, and explorer. In 1969, following his time as a research associate at Penn State, Steve returned to Canada to take a position as an assistant professor in the geology department at the University of Toronto. He held various positions at U of T until his retirement in 2006. Steve was also a visiting professor at universities in France, Australia, Japan, and Hawaii in the United States.
During this time, Steve and his students added to their understanding of sulfide phase equilibria. The most significant work was the development of the sphalerite geobarometer, which provided a meteorological tool for estimating pressure formation of ore deposits and the formation of iron meteorites.
In 1982, Steve was asked to participate in an expedition that took him aboard an Alvin submersible, investigating black smokers on the ocean floor. That trip changed the course of his life.
He came back excited as could be because he saw it as a natural laboratory to see how all the things that he had been working with and trying to understand, he could actually see them happening.
Steve Scott was the first Canadian economic geologist to witness the formation of massive sulfide deposits on the seafloor. He parlayed this interest into a career as one of the world's top marine scientists.
As early as 1984, he was the first to recognize that seafloor deposits could be an economic resource, which led to his interest on how they could be recovered and limiting environmental issues. And within about 30 years after that initial discovery, an innovative industry now exists around the concept of mining seafloor polymetallic deposits. Steve himself was a co-discoverer of several deep seafloor mineral precipitating hydrothermal sites, including the Suara 1 deposit in the Eastern Mans Basin offshore Papua New Guinea.
Steve is kind of like the great-grandfather of a whole development of research out there now that has dozens and dozens of really top-notch people doing it and are following in his footsteps.
One of Steve Scott's greatest legacies will be the impact he has had on his collaborators and students. He and Joan affectionately referred to them as the Scott Diaspora and considered them extended family who are spread around the globe.
Everybody was important to him. He would have them as grad students, and then they would become colleagues, and they would be wherever, all over the world.
But Steve managed to make them all outstanding because he taught them well. He mentored them well.
Many of the people Steve helped guide are today making significant contributions to academia and the mining industry. Like most geologists, Steve believed the more rocks you saw, the better geologist you became. Steve's research led him to create many noted publications, which were still being cited 50 years after publication. As a highly respected professor, he also supervised numerous theses. Steve's outstanding contributions led to being recognized by academia and industry, receiving many awards, including a doctorate from Université de Bretagne Occidentale in France, and becoming a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. Steve was known as a great communicator who had the ability to transfer his energy and enthusiasm to his students, industry, and the public. His expertise was sought after well into his retirement, evident by the 498 invited lectures he presented in over 20 countries. Steve and Joan traveled extensively during their long marriage and together organized yearly lectures in China over a 10-year period.
I sometimes like to refer to Steve as the Kermit of the Frog of geology. He was incredibly enthusiastic. Particularly when we got into the marine world, there was just no holding Steve back. He was so enthusiastic about it. And that kind of explained Steve for his whole career.
He loved life, and he was very determined. He was very inquisitive, very curious, and very determined to do a good job. And he was enthusiastic about his job. He was enthusiastic about geology, enthusiastic about people knowing it, and about science, and people knowing about science.
He'd make that effort, and he'd make it for his students and his colleagues, his friends everywhere. He was a great champion of other people.